As promised in the last episode of the 2022 bike build series, we are going to be putting brakes onto the bike that I'll be riding at the trails this year, aka Victoria's bike. In the last episode, we put different cranks, pedals, sprocket, chain, and rear wheel onto this bike. Check it out if you missed it, but this time we're going to be putting brakes on it, and to put new brakes all on this bike, from the lever all the way back to the brakes, we need to take off the old stuff. So let's get to a time lapse for that. And before we get to the time lapse though, I do want to point out the fact that this lever and the brakes themselves came off of my original Fit Team Complete from back in 2006. Thought that was pretty sweet that it was on this bike now. I've been using it, or it's been being used even this long after. So let's just get right on into it and take these brakes off. We're going to be taking them off as a whole. And we're officially done taking the brakes off of this bike. Alright, we're riding brakeless at the trails this year. Not really, but it is kind of an interesting prospect of having no brakes on a bike that is exactly the same as the bike that I ride on a daily basis. We're not doing it though. So we've got our KINK Desist brakes, and I think what I'm going to do is put the brakes on the back first. So let's get to a better angle for that. Alright, so before we slide this right side brake arm on, I wanted to show you guys that with the KINK Desist brake set that comes on this like cardboard thing, at least, it comes with two different length bolts. Get a better focus on that for you. We got these shorter ones and a longer set. And I'm assuming that they're not including these for no reason. We're using the shorter ones here, but I'm assuming that there's some kind of removable brake mount or something that can use these longer bolts, and that they would go all the way through the brakes and into the frame, as you can see like this. So I'm assuming there's some type of utility here, and the fact that they've got the thread locker already on them as well. So do not lose one of these sets of bolts if you get these, because you may end up needing the longer ones and not realizing it, or you may accidentally toss the short ones and not realize that you need them. Something to definitely keep in mind here. And with that being said, we can first move this pad out of the way, because it's definitely not where it needs to be. And then second, slide this brake arm onto the brake mount and put the bolt into the mount. When you do this as well, the correct sides for the springs are already there. Do not mess up where your springs go, because if you do, your springs will be bending backwards and not working the way they're supposed to. These things are packaged the way they are for a reason, and to hopefully make it dummy proof. And if for some reason you do get confused, I'll come in here and talk for a second. I have videos on how to install BMX brakes. All you got to do is type in how to install BMX brakes, and these videos will come up. We're also kind of doing it right now in a way. So we're tightening these on here. I definitely rotated that pad the wrong way. We're getting it going here, and then we will put the other side on before we continue with what should be a fairly easy and straightforward process, because with this there shouldn't have to be any cutting of cables or anything like that. It should just be install and adjust. We're going to find out if that is indeed the case. At this point, we could also adjust spring tension. I'm going to save spring tension for once everything else is installed, and we'll do spring tension right before we connect cables. Okay, so that's there. Another good thing to do at this time before you have spring tension is adjusting where your pads sit. Because you don't have any spring tension, there's nothing pulling your brake pad away. And what you want to do for this is potentially snug your bolt so that your brake arm is where it's going to be when it's tight, but don't tighten the tension at all. So now we don't have play in the brake arm, and we're just gonna tighten this down where it should be, so that when these are done, we have a solid brake pull. Okay, so that's done. Spring tension is actually not all the way tight anyways. We can grab our other set, and we're going to definitely rotate the pad the correct direction this time. Probably still did it wrong. I'm going to loosen it up so we can get it down further and slide it onto the brake mount. Put our cap back on here. The installation process for things is definitely pretty simple. Spring tension is something that can be confusing for sure, so I have videos about that one as well. If you need more help, refer to those videos, because I go through things very in depth and in a way that I think will definitely help you if you're having trouble adjusting your spring tension, because it's a matter of personal preference how you want to set it up, and I talk about all of those things. I talk through how to do it and just give you as much information as possible in hopefully the easiest to digest kind of way. So we're just gonna cut to the point where I have this bolt all the way tight, because these bolts take a second to get tightened down. And here we are at the front of the bike to install the brake lever. We have the KINK Restrain brake lever here. We're going to be installing this one. It's a very clean and simple brake lever that you don't have any adjustment through a barrel adjuster in the front, but they do compensate for that in the cable that I'm going to be putting on by having like an extra long barrel adjuster for that. But putting this thing on is super simple. You just get the bolt out of there. It hinges open just like any other hinge brake lever. And then you put the bolt back in and get it placed where you want it to be. This is going to be interesting for me because I have been a Odyssey mono lever guy for literally ever. The only other levers I've had are the one that was just on here and a Dirty Harry that I don't believe I rode for very long. So that feels decent. This is something we can kind of make do with for a second until we get it done and on the ground and I'm sitting on the bike. Then next, we've got our brake cable. This is the linear one-piece cable. Take the packaging off of here. One thing I find that's nice about KINK's cables is that they have this rotating brass piece, which means that the cable is essentially floating in this area. Then also, you can take off the Velcro here. They include this nice Velcro cable strap. I've already done a video talking about all of KINK's brake components, but I figured that was quite a while ago, and some of you might have missed it. So we got 3 zip ties we're gonna have to get rid of here. So what I was showing you before is that it's got this piece on the end that rotates, essentially making that part of the cable float. Well, at the bottom of the cable, this part also rotates. So the inner cable is essentially always floating, which means that there's not going to be any cable binding that happens, which is definitely something nice that KINK has included here. So installation of the cable is super simple, just like any other cables. And one thing I will point out here that I definitely want to make sure that I point out, because I just recently learned this for myself, is that your cable ends, the housing ends, you don't want to crimp these. If you crimp this onto the cable, it pinches the inside and adds friction to the cable, which is not something that you want. So these can just sit on here. What's it going to hurt? It's not going to fall off. It's under constant pressure. So it's definitely something to take note of. But let's put this cable into the lever. I can't see where I'm aiming for. There we go. Easy enough. And then we'll slide through and we'll go to the mid part of the bike where we've got to install something else right here. So if we look closely at the frame here, you'll notice a lack of a cable guide. I took the other one off with the whole brake setup, so it's self-contained and all whole as one. I've got another one here. I literally just used gyro tabs for this because with a gyro tab, you can put it on here and then you have access to the little machine screw at all times in case it ever comes loose. Some other setups have a piece that goes around the screw and you can't get to it unless you take things completely apart. So this is what I do, and normally gyro tabs don't have a hole for your cable to go in, so I literally just cut a little slot in there for it to go into. So let's get this installed here. We've already got the screw on the Allen wrench, and make sure that's straight. Give it a nice good tighten, and we're good there. And now we can take our cable, which also has no pressure on the housing, slide it up into there on the wrong side so that we can pull it back out, slide it up in there on the correct side, and start to tighten our extremely long barrel adjuster. So I'm going to tighten this in most of the way before we go back to the back again and start to connect things and finish up with the rear part of our bikes, or of our brakes. Okay, so now let's move backward a little bit so that we can start to kind of connect things and button them up. So you'll see we don't have anything in here on the brakes. We'll take care of that right now. Alright, so we're to the back of the bike here to adjust our spring tension and put our little cable pieces in for our cable ends. I've already went ahead and done the other side because I know that you can't really see it from here. So let's adjust our spring tension on this side. As you can see here, KINK actually labels it so you know which way you need to turn in order to have higher or lower spring tension. So if we're starting from nothing, we know that we need to turn towards the plus sign in order to get spring tension, which helps people in not tightening it the wrong way. So let's check here. That is way too much. I'm going to start way lower than I think I'll need, just so we can see how nice of a brake pull we can actually get with this thing. Okay, so I'm going to leave it right there. That matches the other side. I'm trying to match them. And the idea here to get the best feeling brake pull, in my opinion, is to make it as light of a brake pull as possible that you can get away with while still pulling your brakes back. And with this process too, you may have to readjust your brake pad. It's just part of it. I also noticed that it's not flat on the rim where it was at. So that's something you want to take note of too. You want your brake pad to be flat on your rim so you're getting as much contact as possible and not losing out on any braking power. Okay, we're good there. Now what we're going to take is our little end pieces that come with these brakes that simply slide into the brake arm. It literally, you can see there's a notch on this thing that's a higher part here. That's so that when you slide it into the corresponding notch on the brake arm and rotate it, it can't come out. So we actually need that to be facing the other way, and we take the other one and we put it in facing upward so that when our brakes are in use or whenever we have everything set up, these parts are on an even plane rather than not being lined up with each other. So, what do we have here? So it looks like we need to take out a lot of adjustment here. These cables actually have 3 different options for where the cable end ends up being. And as we can see, in order to use these brakes, these 3 options, definitely we have to go with the furthest one And I'm going to move the camera a little bit so you can see how much we actually need to adjust out. It does look like we should have that much. If not, we may have to explore other options. Okay, looks like we may actually have to explore these other options. Pulling the brakes though, they feel nice and smooth. However, we ran out of adjustment here. So we're going to have to explore some other options. All right, we've got things figured out here, and simply just the fact that I've flipped my gyro tab to be facing the other way. It was back here, so it gives us probably a little less than an inch more of room in our adjustment. If it means that I don't have to do any kind of like customizing with these cables and they just work out the box, I'm going to flip this thing every day of the week just so I can have the ease of use that they are meant to have. So as we can see here, I get my cables in there. Let's pull the brakes so we have a ton of adjustment to pull out, but I think that we'll be able to make it work. And as I said in the previous video, this is not the rear wheel that's going to go on here. The rear rim that's going to be on here is probably going to be the other one, which is much skinnier than this, which may mean I have to figure something out, but we will see when we get there. Oh yeah, that works. What we notice here in the fact that we're using a straight cable, and this is a teachable moment from my eyes over here in the corner. Brake spring tension matters when you're using a straight cable, because if one side has more tension than the other, it means that it's pulling harder, which means that your brake pads are going to be offset in where they sit in relation to your rim. So that's what I'm experiencing right now. This one on this side is further away from the rim than this side, which means simply either I can lessen the spring tension on here to make it closer to this one, or I can raise the spring tension on this side to bring it closer to this side. And I think that's the route I'm going to take here rather than loosening the other side. And like I said earlier, I have a video dedicated to this subject that can explain it very well to you. Let's try pulling it again. This is a matter of trial and error with this. Okay, and we've got these to a nice point where they're very, very close to where I would want them. What I'm feeling right now feels pretty good. The pads themselves, they definitely need adjusted some, which is to be expected, honestly. When you get to this point in things, this is where you make your final adjustments and making sure that everything lines up the way that you want it to. And this is the part where you can make your brakes feel really awesome. Sometimes that can lead to some frustration in trial and error and tinkering with things. Sometimes it happens first try, but I will say that I've been working with brakes for quite a long time, and it still takes me plenty of time to do some tinkering. So I'm going to get this tinkering out of the way, and then we're going to button this thing up. And at this point, all that's really left to do is to put the cable ties onto the frame, or cable tie. I feel like I have to reuse this shoestring that I had on here. I don't know why, but I just kind of feel like I have to. And actually, before we get too crazy with this, what I really need to do is take these pieces out of my brakes, and I need to prepare myself for any potential tail whips and bar spins that might happen this year at the trails. I need to take this cable out, put it on the other side of my frame so that my cable binds less on these things. It's not supposed to be an issue as much with linear cables, but as you can see now, if I do a bar spin, my cable is wrapped less than it would be if it was already around the frame right here to begin with. While I'm doing this, I guess I can reflect on how easy of a process this was. In getting this stuff from Kink, they really just wanted my opinion on like how well things worked together and what I thought of their brake system. And now that I've installed it, at least part of it, the straight cable part with the cable that has 3 ends on it and is all self-contained, I can give my opinion in that this works really well together. Everything was super simple to install, even when I had a bump in the road with like having that not amount or having not enough adjustment on this. All I had to do was flip that, which took 10 seconds, and then I had enough adjustment. In my brakes, you can hear they're dialed as it gets. And I also forgot to mention, I tried really hard to use the brake pads that came with these brakes. They're these super long Cool Stop BMX brake pads, but they've got this like piece on them that goes out further so that you can tow in your brakes and do whatever you want to do with them. And I'm just the kind of person that likes this. My pads hitting my brakes instantly because they're parallel to the rim, and that's just something that I like with my brakes. So I couldn't deal with it. I put on the Odyssey 2x4. I think those are what they are, the clear pads that were on there already. So that's what's on there for brake pads. We've got the cable guide on there just because I like Kink's cable guides. I'm going to toss on this one back here. Cable installed, brake installed. I'm not going to put one up here. We'll see how it affects tire grabs and stuff. If it does, we'll figure something out. But at this rate, I've got brakes on the bike. I've got my wheel all set up. I haven't put a sprocket bolt in yet, but that's the only thing I need to do before I can take this baby to the trails and take it off some sweet jumps. So that being said, another chapter in the 2022 bike build series and in the trail bike, aka Victoria's bike, is coming to a close. Thank you for watching. Thank you to Kink for sending me this stuff originally and getting my thoughts on it. I appreciate that, and I appreciate you for being here. So hopefully, if you're new here or you haven't yet, you'll hit the subscribe button down below so that we can see you tomorrow for another video and in the next bike build series video, where I think it's the art project. I think that's all we got to do before some minor adjustments on the bike. Art project is next. Get excited. I know I am. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you then.